Hey folks, Mark with MD Custom Fly Rods here, and just going to be covering a few little questions on today's or this week's episode, so stay tuned. Okay, well, didn't get a whole lot of questions on in, but I did take some that were from before. One of the main things, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of maybe do this a little bit while I'm doing some work. So I got this week's rod here, which is an 11-foot 3-weight. I've got getting ready to go on out. But one of the questions I get quite often is you'll see wood in a lot of my grips, and why I do it and when I do it and so forth. I like that, so I'm just going to redo this. One, I do that. I do not do that in all of my rod building. I usually will do that for certain, or I try to. One, if the customer wants it, they'll get it. I don't care any other reason. If they want it, it looks pretty. Just plain, for that reason alone, I would do it. But there is actually a reason why I tend to go with it in some cases. Is what I have found in my own personal experience is and especially on these Euro rods, going with wood will help with sensitivity. If you have done any Euro fishing, everything is about sensitivity. Everything is about being able to get your bait and your fly on the bottom and feeling the bottom and getting more sensitivity on down there. The wood just helps going through, as opposed to going something like a full pre-made cork on something like this right here. It's a little bit different, but something on, like, if you're holding on like this, you've got this much cork insulation between you and the rod. You're just not going to feel it. So that's one primary reason. Another reason is the durability of it. It is just not going to get eventually torn up in the main areas, which is one of the reasons I do like to also use wood on my fighting butts. The fighting butt, your rod's on the ground, your rod is thrown up, it's thrown into your gut, it's banged up in a boat. It's a good hardwood. That fighting butt made out of wood, out of oak or maple, is going to last 100 years. So it's a durability, it's a look issue. And also when you go back and look at some of the older custom, not even custom rods, I guess many of them were custom rods way back in the day. Fly rods, they were wood handles. Even on the old bamboos, they were wood handles. So that's the reason for the wood handles. The other issue or other question I often get is several from new rod builders on the glues, because you'll see in my background I've got some Pro Coats, I've got the Flex Coat High Build, which is your resin. I've got the 5-minute epoxy. I've got the regular epoxy glue, the Flex Coat epoxy glue, Gorilla Glue, brown, Gorilla Glue, clear. And I've also have the Gorilla Glue wood glue, as well as I also use Titebond wood glue. Yes, I use all of them, and they all have their place. And easily enough to explain this to you. Let me see if I have anything around here, because on the previous rod build, I did have to do this. I had to take advantage of the Gorilla Glue. This is not often used. I don't use it as often, but the advantage you're able to get with this and at the time. And that it would be, let me pull this back on out, and I will pull off. Let me take a look here. Okay, this worked good. this little rod section here. Let's say, for grins, let's just say this is your rod base and your grip is going in. And any of you building rods will know as you're buying your over-the-counter stuff, you have this a lot of play in your wiggle room and everything else. The way they tell you to, and even I will tell you to take up that space, is you go and they run bands of thin masking tape, or use some bands of the self-adhesive drywall tape, mud tape, and you run that through and to take up the space. And then you glue it on down using, they have like the 2-part putty. I personally don't like that. It's, once again, it's a personal choice. Is what I found is the Gorilla Glue works better in those cases. And the Gorilla Glue brown, this stuff right here, this is what you want. Because, and I buy it, keep it in the small bottles. I don't use that much of it because it usually will harden up before you can ever get through the whole thing anyway. Or for me anyway. Because any of you who have used it knows that as it starts to dry and react with the air, it expands. And the bubble, does like a bubble reaction with the humidity in the air, and it gets hard and solid and nasty and is horrible. So in rod building, we can use that to our advantage, and I will use that to take up that space. Therefore, I will essentially be making a solid custom piece, round piece between here and here that cannot be broken. That bond is permanent. It is not coming off. Rough up the rod a little bit on your blank a little bit. If it is a good Loomis rod, you don't need to rough it up at all. You don't have any finish on there to take off of. But because it's no UV protectant or anything else like they're on, it's just straight carbon, and it will stick right onto it. Just clean it up a little bit of acetone, smear it all over, put a glove on, smear it all over, put that in place, and come back in an hour, and you'll see how that will just expand on out and squeeze on out of the end, take up, trim up, clean up. It is a permanent that is going to be perfect. The other cases is when you have a perfect fit on the rod going on down, go with the regular Gorilla Glue. You'll get, once again, it's going to do the same bonding technique, but not take up any space. So it will give you it will give you a lot more work time, and the 5-minute epoxy I will often do on getting my reel seat set on when I'm building my reel seats. That way I can, as the reel seat goes in, I have my dummy fly rod to make sure everything lines up just right. I let it hang down and set. That's when I use the 5-minute epoxy, and on occasion I will use that on the tippy top. Epoxies, I really like the Pro Coat, but I generally prefer the high build. That's generally what I run, and that's why I have the pumps on down there, where it's just one pump per. These are just sometimes nice. That one I just need to, I've just got a little bit of this left, so I'm using it left when I just have a little bit of here to there, taking care of, razoring out a bubble or something that's just not quite right. That way I can just do a little quick dab, sight measure it, and just move on. Larger batches, always go with the pump, always go with good measurements. That's what I use there on epoxies. The last item, which we'll go back towards on epoxies, is I have brought up, and several people have brought up, is the fact on my first batch, whenever I run and mix up epoxy in any sort of, when I'm doing my wraps, I have my epoxy in, I put in a small amount of acetone. And that is done to thin the epoxy out. The drying time it'll last a lot longer before it dries out. This will cause it to get really thin and really watery, And is what that does in this case is it will make it so the epoxy soaks all the way through, down through the wraps, down to the blank, and make connection with the blank. That first epoxy coating is the most important. Even it'll make it so you're going to have to come in and do a second one on your wraps because you're not going to be able to get a high build on there. But it soaks up into the wraps. It soaks up down to the blank. And I have seen some custom rods and even some commercial rods where the guide eyes will actually slip. This will prevent that from ever happening. The question has come on up, has been formed because when I mix just a small dab of epoxy in there, I'm not doing a whole lot, is when I take a flame to it. Yes, this is highly explosive, highly flammable. However, it is so thinned out, it is not, as you know, anytime you've ever flamed out anything on a rod, you don't do it that long. It's just, you're hitting it real close to the side. You're not going right directly on it. It's almost a deflective flame. And then too, especially with this, you're just having to go over it really quick, not even close, because one of the other things that the acetone does is it takes out all the bubbles. I just have the old school habit of, I like to make sure that the bubbles are taken out of because it's less possibility of work having to go through later down the road. The other thing you're going to have to worry about is if you're normally used to seeing your epoxy set up in 4 hours, give it an extra 2, because it's going to take an extra 2 hours for that acetone to completely flash out of the epoxy. So at this point, I'm 12 minutes into this, talking way too much, and I've got 12 minutes less done on this rod, which I would like to get out in the next couple of days. So I need to get to wrapping. So you can tune back in to watch this. If not, a lot of the countries has some very beautiful weather, so get out and get yourself fishing, since I can't right now. But get yourself out and go fishing. Take friends and family out fishing. It's a good time to do a good mental break. Have a great day. I'll see you on the water. Bye.